is generally just an hour-long class for the contract part. I printed out lots of other forms as well. So if you have questions on them, we can touch base on that. But I set it up for no longer than 11:30. But if all goes well, I'll have you out here at 11. If you ever have questions about RVAR contracts and you are unsure about it, RVAR is my primary and LAR is my secondary, and I'll be the first to tell you that LAR is way better than RVAR as far as forms go.
Yeah, there was
so much easier.
Yeah,
It wasn't a stack like this.
No, they're much shorter. LARs are much easier. When I first started doing LARs, I was like, no, it isn't. RVAR is easier. No, hands down, LAR is a lot easier to me than RVAR.
Depends on where you're coming from.
Well, but I originated in Roanoke. So when I sold in Roanoke for a total of 6 years before I made the switch. So this is my second time around with real estate. So hi, Miss Kathy, here you go. You're welcome. Okay, so we're going to start, and I also teach licensing classes, so I might throw in some questions just as refreshers. Not everybody teaches the same. I apologize if I drive you crazy as we do this. So my first piece of advice for any kind of contract that you are going to be using, whether it's RVAR, LAR, EIEIO, VAR, whatever, is always to make sure that you are looking at the dates at the bottom to make sure you have the most current forms. So you can go to the RVAR site. If you're a member of RVAR, if you go to their site, don't go to the Flex MLS where you're looking up the actual listings. But if you go to RVAR, on the bottom right or midway down on the right, in blue is a link to click RVAR forms, and all of your forms will come up right there. Okay. Also, Shalia works hard to keep them uploaded in your dot loop. If you're still using your dot loop like you're supposed to, then your forms should be in there as well. What I generally do when I'm looking in dot loop though, is I will look under RVA. Let's say I'm doing a buyer. I will look up an RVAR buyer forms. And then I also go to all new RVAR forms and look in there to make sure I have the most current. So there's several different places in dot loop that you can be looking to make sure you have the most accurate forms, because they change whenever they want to change them. So I'm going to take you through the contract. This is only 7 pages. The LAR is like 9 pages. However, the LAR includes things that the RVAR does not in their contracts, but the RVAR has other addendums for those things. That's what makes this so long. So the very first thing, when I learned contracts, I learned from who I thought was a great teacher. And one of the first pieces of advice he gave me was on the first line where it says this contract of purchase made as of blank, where you're supposed to put the date. Instead of just putting 05/02/1999, he said write out the month, because typos happen. And if you put in them, if you're typing out September, it's a lot harder. The typo, they'll still understand September, but if you type the wrong day or the wrong number for the wrong month or the wrong day, anyway, so that was just a tip that I learned, to write out the total date. Some computers or some systems will allow you to do that. Some will preempt you to just put in an actual day, but if you're handwriting them out, I would honestly suggest you write out the month, the day, and the year. But that's more of a preference. Hey, that's okay. Can somebody pass this to Nanette? Thank you. All right, under number 1 on the first page of the contract for real property is, let me just test your knowledge here, is a street address considered a legal address? No, correct. A legal address is one that includes your meets and bounds, or your government survey, or your lots, blocks, and sections, and that kind of thing. So the address, just the 12 Main Street, is not a legal description. So it's important that you fill this out completely so that you're writing the contract for the appropriate property. You all know where you can find the legal information. You can go to the GIS for that locality. You can sometimes get it off of the listing, the MLS. However, people make mistakes. We're all human. So my advice would be to verify the legal, don't just take somebody's word for it. They could have a typo. Go into the GIS and look for it. If you can't find anything on like lot, block, and section, you certainly could find a tax map ID number or a parcel ID and use that. You can get those off of the GIS system as well. Also, you know, if you really wanted to get in depth, I've had one of these recently in Rockbridge County, and I'll tell you it was a pain, but you can go down to the clerk's office and have them pull the deed book or the whatever and look up a legal description for you if you really wanted to get that technical about it. And then, of course, you're going to put in on the 4th line down, more commonly known as, and that's where you put the street address, the full street address. Agency disclosure. Does anybody need clarification on the difference between designated agency and dual agency? Okay, so if you and I were doing a deal, I had the seller and you bring a buyer, that's a designated agency. If I have the seller and the buyer, that's a dual agency. So I like RVAR because in this box on the middle of the first page, this is another form of agency right there. You're clarifying who represents who from what brokerage. So make sure that you have the listing agent, the listing firm, and then you're checking who you represent, selling agent, selling firm. And then within the last little bit, they've added the line under there that says realtors are required by law and their code of ethics to treat all parties to the transaction honestly. I don't know whether to be sad that we have to be reminded of that or I don't know. But anyway, so just remember your code of ethics with how you treat all parties to the transaction. And then you get clients to sign. Down at the bottom on page 1, your addendums and disclosures. This is where you're going to attach all the other addendums or disclosures to the actual contract. You're going to make them a party to the actual contract. So what you do is you check off what you're going to be using. The standard clauses addendum, inspection addendum if your person wants to have an inspection, the lake addendums and disclosures, I will respectfully pass that off to one of you lake people because I don't sell a whole lot on the lake, so I'm not as well versed in that. I don't think we don't need to go over that today, but if you do, reach out to one of your lake agents and they can help you with that. If you have an agency agreement separate from the purchase agreement, make sure you attach that to the contract. Your lead-based paint, if it's older than January 1978, your septic disclosure. With the LAR, one of the main differences is on the LAR contract, it asks you if the property is served by a septic or a community system or whatever. On here, you're going to do the inspection addendum where at the bottom it says, which we'll get to, the septic inspection is needed. And then we have a disclosure statement that they sign.
Just for clarification, you only send in the agency disclosures if they're dual or
correct, designated.
I mean, if I'm a sole agent,
you don't have to.
That's right.
Yeah, this is plenty.
All that.
No, you only need it if it's a dual or a designated, and I think those are the only two listed under there.
Yeah.
If you have something else too, like we've had the COVID addendum or disclosure that's been going around for about a year now, and if you're using that still for whatever reason, you can write that in at the bottom here. There's several blanks if you want that to become a part of the actual contract itself.
But if you do, then you've got to send all that to the lender.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is going to sound really stupid, but does everyone in here attach the KW RESPAs on their contracts?
No, it's a buyer only thing. So I don't.
Yeah.
No. If let's say you've got the buyer though, I've seen a lot of realtors not attach RESPAs to their contracts.
I do not. It's just something that Keller Williams needs from our client only, so I don't attach it to mine.
My seller doesn't need it. And my lender don't.
That's my question.
Yeah.
And I
No.
don't do the pike either. Like we have to do pike.
title?
Yeah, I don't do that either.
I was told to do that.
So you fill out the form, put it in .loop, but you don't attach it to your contract.
I never do.
Okay.
I get it signed by my client when we have the initial meeting, and then I upload it, it's in the .loop signed for Keller Williams purposes. If that makes sense, yeah. Because basically all you're doing is notifying them that you're not getting a kickback from somebody else who shares business space
Right.
with us.
But you don't have to have it on your contract.
No,
attached,
you don't.
because some realtors do attach it
No,
all the time.
I don't think it would really matter. I mean, I don't know that a lender would care
Yeah, but
if
that's
you
not
did,
bad.
but it's a lot. I mean, they'll
The
look at it and
more
go, why do I
don't
have
to
this?
attach, the better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. Give them the least
That's
amount of
right.
information.
That's
So
it.
you do Pike and McLean, right?
Yes.
Those are the only two respirators you're doing for a buyer.
Yes. Now, and I, excuse me, like, I don't know about down here, but like the Bedford office has priority title. So they have to do Pike title, but they also have to do a Bedford, a separate one, don't they? For priority title, because priority title's in the building, it's renting space.
It's combined in the McLean
Okay, good.
RESPA.
So I don't know if there's like down here, you all have something else, if Amherst has somebody else or whatever, but it just, whoever is included in your,
Okay.
yeah. All right, page 2, occupancy disclosure. If they are financing or something, generally you want them to check that they plan to occupy the property. I've actually had cash buyers say none of your business and refuse to check it, but they're not financing anything, so it doesn't really matter. Residential property disclosure. So we're going to talk about the disclosure here in just a few minutes, but this states the seller represents that the property is or is not subject to the Virginia Real Estate Property Disclosure Act, which requires the seller of certain residential property to furnish the purchaser in a residential property disclosure statement in a form provided by the Real Estate Board. The Disclosure Act requires the seller to deliver the disclosure statement to the purchaser prior to acceptance of this contract. So if you're working with the seller, then one of the forms that you should have them sign while you're doing the listing is the residential property disclosure form. Upload it to the MLS because technically speaking, it can make your contract null and void or terminate the agreement if you have your buyer sign it before you have the seller. Don't do it. So what you want to do is make sure you get, and this is for LAR, RVAR.
It's not null and void. They just have 3 days.
Yes, they have 3 days, but they can say deuces.
Within that 3 days.
Yeah, they can say bye. It's just an easy way to lose a contract.
You're
if you
not
do that.
ratified till that's all done.
Right. So the other thing is with RVAR, hold on, or with Keller Williams.
It's horrible.
Okay, so everybody knows what this is. This is the residential property disclosure. So Keller Williams has done what I call the RPD2. This is the 4-page one that you go over with your sellers or your buyers and have them initial at the bottom of each page. This, you can, what did Carol say the other day? We cannot require that the opposite party initial as well, but you can ask them to. I always ask them to. So this 4-page document is basically outlining what a seller will and will not warrant on the property. There's also information on where you can go to find other information on the property. Having said that, I just had a conversation with Alice this morning, the summary of rights. So the summary of rights is been around for a little while now, and I think it's 3 pages, or is it 4? It's 3. Okay. And I don't know why it printed out in such small print. I apologize for that if you're blind like me. But there are some links in the summary of rights that apparently are not included in the RPD2 that we have. Okay, that's what I learned this morning. I had no idea. So the point being, you can have them, you should always be having your client sign something outlining what the seller is and is not responsible for, or is responsible for notifying a buyer of, or is not responsible for, so that a buyer can do their own due diligence.
The one in your left hand, is that
This one,
RVAR, or is that, what is that?
this is Keller Williams. Summary,
Where do we get that?
it's in the dot loop. Summary of rights is in dot loop as well.
So we need to sign one or the other?
They definitely want the KW one. This one, you don't. You know,
Yeah.
We used to be old school, you know.
Right, well, I'm just trying to figure out to make it simple.
Yeah, make
Yeah.
it simple, keep them.
Do the Keller Williams one. They prefer you to do the Keller Williams one.
They
Yeah,
won't
but then-
give me my
But
money
then
until
you're
that one's
saying
signed.
that the other realtors don't need to sign it for their clients.
No.
Correct. They do
I
not.
don't usually turn it over to the, if I'm a buyer rep, I won't give it to the listing agent, because I just don't, but, because I'm like.
They don't have to.
They don't have to. The least number of things but KW's now making us do this one. You don't get paid till you get that one, okay? So that's why I do it. Okay.
However, that does not excuse the agent from making sure they know if they, I know we probably all had people ask us, are there sex offenders in the area? I've got kids. We can't answer that question. What we can do is direct them to the Virginia State Police website, et cetera, et cetera. Look for Megan's Law and that kind of thing. In that case, that would be on your summary of rights. So if you're not using the summary of rights, make sure you're still disclosing where they can find that pertinent information. Okay.
It also states on the seller's disclosure. Isn't there a link on the seller's disclosure? Used to be. You know what I'm talking about? Right on the seller's disclosure.
Oh,
It's right in front of you. This one.
this one? Oh, this one. Sorry, that's why I was going, what? Let's see.
Used to be.
Mm-mm.
No more?
No more, no more, no more.
Used to be.
Hold on.
Let's see what I know.
Just saying that.
Nope, it's not on there anymore. Okay,
Just on this.
Oh, I know.
any questions on that?
Yeah, just to clarify, you said this is the only one that Keller Williams
Keller,
requires, this one.
this one, the one that says,
POR, okay.
yeah,
And this replaces the residential property disclosure?
No.
no, you
Okay.
still have to have the disclosure signed.
Both.
Keller Williams wants this signed too. And I don't, this, Keller, I think not all agents were using the summary of rights at one point. And it was very much recommended that we also have clients sign the summary of rights, which is available in both LAR and RVAR on dotloop. And so this was made, and Keller Williams would like for us to have our client's initial, and if you want to send it to your other client, to the other side of the transaction, you can, but they don't have to sign it. It's kind of like your RESPA. Think of it that way. They don't, other people don't have to sign it, but your clients do,
But you do need to have an initial
by your client.
every page.
Yes, it's at the bottom. It's got little blocks on the bottom of every page.
Two different documents, the RPD and the RPD too.
Yes, you will not, this,
What?
Yeah.
this does not take place of the
Simple, we want
one,
simple.
this is a must, no matter what. This
We
is
got
not
that.
going away.
Yeah, we got that.
Okay. This is Keller Williams' preference between this and the summary of rights, depending on who you ask.
Yeah.
If
Still have to get the summary of rights signed too, right?
No.
it would be preferential, I guess, if you really wanted to be, yeah.
If you don't have
Exactly.
the summary, if you don't have the summary, you can still get paid. But if you don't have that one done, you can't get paid.
Gotcha.
All right, that's the bottom line.
You'll get a message from Megan. You need this document.
Yeah.
It only needs to be signed by the buyers.
Or the seller, whoever you're representing, get your client to sign it.
We don't have to do,
Yes. I get all of my, whoever I'm representing, because it says, this is what, if I'm representing a seller, I'm saying this is what you're responsible for, and this is what you aren't responsible for.
So, yeah, it's basically the summary for Keller Williams.
Yes.
You know, all right, I know.
Crossing those
complex.
T's and dotting their I's.
I'm
I
like,
love simplicity.
Have I blown your mind at all today so
Yes, you
far?
I want to get paid.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. Property Owners Association disclosure number 5 on page 2. Everybody knows or should know, if the property is located in a property owner, in a subdivision or whatever, where there's a HOA or whatever, then you need to disclose that. And then there are 3 blanks in that paragraph that you need to fill in. These are the dates when you want to receive the HOA documents, how long your client or a buyer has to review them, etc. So make sure you fill in those dates. By the way, if you're doing a contract of any kind, never leave anything blank. Always put NA in it. So there's no,
Question.
thank you. Couldn't think of the word. Number 6 is the same thing, but it's for condominium. Make sure you check is or is not. Even if you're doing a house, this is a contract. Again, don't leave anything blank. Just put NA in those boxes. It might sound simple or dumb, but might CYA later on. So make mechanics lien disclosure at the bottom. This is Virginia law that permits persons performing labor to get paid if they haven't gotten paid. So basically you're just disclosing that information and talking about it with your client. Same thing with fair housing. There has been an update to fair housing, and I don't know that it's on here yet. Megan's law disclosure, there it is on the contract, number 9. And it has the website down there for you, which might be why it is not on the Keller Williams property RPD2 form, or the residential property disclosure statement.
Interesting though, I don't think it's on the LAR, so.
Mm,
I've never seen that.
so we need to get it. Then I would still tell them about, make sure you're telling them about the website.
With the condo association, the property association, is the person, the seller is responsible for
Providing that, yeah, for having that information forwarded to the potential purchaser, yes.
Okay, has
Yeah.
anybody had, this is where the seller doesn't pay for it and puts it on the buyer's side?
The realtor is responsible for getting it though.
No, owner, in some
It's the
cases,
owner.
the owner can be the only one that can request it in some cases.
Yeah. My aunt and uncle just sold and they had to, they
Brownstone
wouldn't
won't
take it
let
from me.
Get it. Brownstone says the owner has to get it.
And I'm not paying for it.
That's right. Whoever, and then if I order it, then I'm the one that's got to pay for it.
So the actual seller needs to order it and pay for it.
And that's something when you're going to your listing appointment for a condo or something, you need to explain to them in advance. This is going to be an expectation once we get an offer on your property. You're going to have so many days to get the condo disclosure, so you might want to be working on that. Give them a heads up. And then hope to God it doesn't sit on the market for 90 days. All right, page 3. What time is it? How we be?
10:23. You're good.
Okay. All right, this one is a little different than the LAR as well. This is on personal property to be included or fixtures. The LAR documents specifically state refrigerator, range, built-in microwave, or whatever in this little paragraph up here. But the RVAR simply says built-in appliances in the kitchen. So I know some lenders squirm if you list appliances there. You can do a thank you, what is it called? The point of sale or the purchase of, thank you. You can do one of those if necessary. Otherwise, I write it out. I want the oven, I want the gas range or whatever, and I write them all out. Now, something else that I was taught to do is if you're selling a home or your buyer's buying a home where maybe it has in-law quarters downstairs, or maybe they have an extra freezer in or an extra refrigerator in the property, I will put the name brand of what's in the refrigerator. I want the Frigidaire double-sided whatever, because you don't want them changing it out prior to closing for whatever's downstairs.
Easy enough to find the model number too.
Yes, exactly. So put as much information as you possibly can, and if you think a lender's going to squirm, then put it on a point of sale or whatever we said it was called, because I'm drawing a blank.
You know, I haven't had any lenders doing that for a year or so about appliances.
It's nothing about appliances, but when you add, you know, especially over here, when you had furniture and.
Oh, that, but I mean, at one point really balked on appliances.
They
but
did. I
don't
had a
anymore.
couple, but
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you do
Yeah.
the personal property addendum, do you still have to write it out? Right here on
See
10,
addendum.
see addendum?
yeah. The only problem with writing C addendum is that then it becomes a part of the contract, so you have to provide it.
The lender's gonna throw up.
So I always send the personal property then to the lender, we're not supposed to.
I never do.
They don't want
They
it.
don't want to, they don't want to know, because
Yeah,
to
but-
them, it's like,
You're not financing the refrigerator.
yeah, exactly.
I don't wanna know the value of,
So what do you put in this box then? Can't we just NA? But it doesn't really, it does apply.
I would put it in there until a lender tells you otherwise.
Right.
I would always
Just
put it in
everything
there. And if the lender comes back and says, I need this on a separate addendum, put it on something separate, fine, then you can do an addendum to the contract and refer to the whatever. All right, purchase price, of course, you're gonna write it out numerically and do word numbers. For the purchase price, under deposit A on page 3, is a earnest money deposit required?
No.
It is not. However, does it sweeten the deal a little bit?
especially these days.
Yeah, especially these days. But it is not a requirement. So make sure you specify. And Keller Williams does not hold EMDs anymore. Remember that. So you need to make sure it's being held with a title company or an appraiser, or, I mean, not an appraiser. Jesus, take the wheel. Attorney, thank you. That's the word. I am struggling. I'm driving the struggle bus today, y'all. And then you're going to specify if it was in the form of a check that it's already been paid or will be paid, and if so, in how many days it's going to be paid. Oh, well, this one already says it for you, 5 business days. With the LAR, you can fill in how many days. Lender's first trust. So you're going to fill in how they're going to be purchasing the property. So is it a conventional loan, an FHA, a VA, a VHDA, whatever. If you don't know all of the exact terms and you leave it blank, I wouldn't leave it blank. I'd put an NA. At where it says at a fixed rate not exceeding blank % per year. If you're not using that box, put an NA in it. Just make sure you're checking whichever one applies. Make sure you're filling that one out and put NA to what doesn't apply. Does that make sense? Because I'm struggling. All right, when you're looking at D in the box where it says other financing terms, this is where you're going to list requests for the seller if you have a request for your seller to pay closing costs. Because it's unlike the LAR where you have a blank to fill in, you don't have one with the RVAR. So that's the box that you're going to put seller to pay whatever towards the purchaser's closing cost, points, prepaids, and anything else deemed acceptable by the lender. I also learned this several years ago, and I include it on all of my contracts. Have you ever had a client who gets knee deep into it and then the lender comes back and says, you could save more money if you did this type of loan. Let's save you some bucks and do this. Okay. Instead of having to rewrite the wheel for the contract, what I always put in that box is the purchaser reserves the right to change terms of financing as long as it doesn't change seller's net proceeds or closing date. So if something does change with the financing, I don't have to go back and do an addendum and get everybody to sign it again.
It's really important because if I'm paying cash for our property and I decide, I don't want to pay cash for it, I want to finance it
Correct.
instead. This is really very important when it comes to finding cash deals.
Correct. And I've had that happen.
Can you repeat that?
Yep. Purchaser reserves the right to change the terms of financing as long as it doesn't change the seller's net proceeds or closing date. Is there anybody on Zoom? Hey. So purchaser reserves the right to change the terms of financing as long as it does not as long as it doesn't change the seller's net proceeds or closing date.
And see, I can take cash, but then what if I just wanted to take it out of my home equity line instead,
Mhm.
which is the same as paying cash,
Mhm.
you see? So, and sometimes I would rather pull that from the home equity line than have to take the money out of
Absolutely.
my bank yet, you know?
I've
But
had
it's still cash
investors-
On the same terms, but.
Exactly. Investors have done that. I've had property where investors have bought and they can show me a pre-qual letter with a lender or whoever, but then they get into it and whatever price we've negotiated down, they're like, I'm just going to pay cash for that. So anyway, okay. Next is a cash contract, number 12. If it's not a cash contract, you're going to put NA. Loan application. So this is where you're going to write in how many days it's going to take for your buyer to go into loan application. Seriously, if you have longer than 7 days in there, I might come back to you and go, no, this is a 30-day close. Why does your buyer need 10 days to go to loan, to do the loan? Seriously, no. So watch what you put in there. Make it appropriate. If you're wanting to close in 30 days for your client, don't give them 10 days to go talk to their bank and get the process started.
Better be already there.
Exactly. They should have been there while you were writing the contract and you forwarded it to them to sign there. Okay. And then you want to obtain loan approval on or before what date? You can put now with today's, the market the way it is and lenders being backlogged the way they are. And anyway, I'm having some issues with one right now. Putting it any sooner than, 10 days before the closing date or whatever, you might not make that. You know what I'm saying?
I always put someone date.
I always do that too, but I have some people that when I say that, they're like, why would you do that? If it was a 60-day closing or more, I may not want to drag it out for 60 days and only to find out the buyer didn't qualify and my seller has to put it on the market. That I can see. But if we're doing a quick 30, 45-day close, I always put the closing date in there, whatever your preference is. And then it says down at, and I underlined this is after the second blank in that section, says purchaser will not be deemed in default, but seller will nevertheless have the right to terminate the contract upon written notice to purchaser in that if you fail to obtain loan approval on that date. In that event, the purchaser will be entitled to a refund of the deposit. Absent such notice from the seller, the time for loan approval will be automatically extended until the seller notifies the purchaser of termination.
Does everybody understand loan approval and pre-qual?
You can be pre-qualified,
Huge
but
difference.
You're not gonna get approved.
Correct.
You gotta get the process to get approved.
Correct.
Right. It's underwriting, you've got to underwriting.
Absolutely. All right, next. So that's why, in my opinion, it saves you a lot of hassle just to put the closing date in that blank, because you're giving them until closing to find out if they've gotten loan approval, because you're at the lender's mercy. You don't know what their schedule, and if they're gonna, like I'm learning right now, I still don't have a closing date on one. It's been 2 weeks. Anyway.
Buy new cars.
Yes, or quit their job or go on a fancy vacay. Okay, so the next page, the first, the paragraph, the first and second and third paragraph kind of talks about default. Lender required repairs. So if you have an appraisal done and the lender comes back and says, we're not going to loan this money until A, B, and C is fixed on the property, well, then the seller has to agree or has to agree to let the buyer do it. If the seller doesn't, then they might not get the mortgage. They might not be loaned the money to purchase the property. This is all stuff that you want to discuss with your client so they know what's up when you meet with them to sign the document. Okay, inspection, number 14 is inspections. This contract is or is not subject to one or more inspections. Just because they don't want to have a home inspection doesn't mean that it's not subject to a termite, a well, and a septic inspection. So make sure you're checking that box accordingly. Just because they don't want a home inspection doesn't mean the contract is not subject to inspections. With the LAR, the home inspection, et cetera, is included in the contract. With the RVAR, you have to sign the addendum, which is somewhere in your mess of papers. Okay, it's a 2-page document that it's called inspection addendum. And in it, you're going to fill out the top with the pertinent information, the date of the contract, who the seller is, who the purchaser is, and what property it pertains to. Then you're going to fill in how many business days they have to have a home inspection. Excuse me, again, as representing a seller, I want that to be the shortest number of days possible because I don't want it to sit out off the market that long if a buyer's not going to be happy with their inspection. So I want it done quickly. Realistically speaking, I personally think 7 days is plenty. Lots of times, especially again, if you're doing a 30-day contract, why do you want to give them 10 days to have the inspection done? I want them to do the inspection tomorrow. And then at the bottom, you're going to check what other, the home inspection, do they want a radon inspection, well inspection, septic, termite, inflow and infiltration? Does everybody understand inflow and infiltration? The Western Virginia Water Authority in Roanoke, they're located in downtown Roanoke, and the lady's name is Terry, I believe. Certain parts of Roanoke County and Roanoke City, and I think the southern end of Botetourt County, like Cloverdale and Troutville, maybe, require an I&I inspection be done by the seller of the property. What you do is you call the Western Virginia Water Authority and request it. It's free of charge, but it has to be done before it can close. Now, they will tell you if the water is drinkable or not. Okay. Not every location has to have it done. So if you're unsure, like Salem has some Roanoke addresses in the city, well, in outlying areas of Salem, their addresses might be a Roanoke address. You can always call and ask. Here's a tip for you. There is a form that you can fill out on the Western Virginia Water Authority site to have an inspection done. I did that one time and they never did the inspection. And I called and said, what's up? And they said, oh, we don't look at those things. We're so busy, we don't have time. Don't fill it out online if you don't have to.
Talk to a live body.
You have to talk to a live body and they will get it done quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But don't rely on the online form. Okay, so that's for an I&I inspection in Roanoke. Some areas of Botetourt, I think, require it. Make sure that if you represent a seller, you have them, or you call and request an I&I inspection for the property.
At the time of listing, right?
No, I don't. I just do it once we get a contract. And then I call and say, hey, we're closing this date. Can you get somebody out there?
Anything.
No, it's free. It's free.
And would it hurt to have one done if it's free? Just when you list it, go on ahead and get them to do it, so you got it on record? That's fine.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't.
Because I'm sure it's got
Yeah.
a date it has to be, like how far can go back, but.
Yeah, I mean, if I was a buyer, like you're saying, a date it goes so far back, if this is a vacant property and I'm a buyer, I want one that's kind of close.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
This market, you don't know.
Right, exactly. Okay, so back to the contract, page 4. Under number 15, equipment and condition at an inspection. This outlines the purchaser's right to have inspections. Now, their inspectors must be licensed. Any repairs that are done that are found on a home inspection are supposed to be done by a licensed contractor. Good luck finding one. So A and B and C, you'll want to go over, and D with your clients to let them know the seller's obligations and your right as a buyer. Also, I've had this happen to me and I hate it. Under C, the seller will have all utilities, systems, and appliances that convey in service at the time of all inspections and or pre-occupancy or pre-settlement verification to be conducted pursuant to this contract. If you have a listing and it's vacant, they still have to keep the stuff on so you can have it inspected. And I know some sellers will balk at that and think, I don't want to pay, for lights and stuff. If you want to sell your house, sorry, Hopefully it'll sell in like a day in this market, but sorry, let them have their inspections. You can't inspect a well if there's no electricity to the property. You can't run the well pump.
Like a car without wheels.
What?
Like buying a car without wheels.
Exactly. So please make sure you share that with your sellers who are anxious to turn everything off. Number 16, lead-based paint disclosure. Everybody knows the magical date of January 1st, 1978. Anything built prior to that requires a lead-based paint disclosure. Anything after that, you're good to go. The 17, the seller and purchaser's options. I really hate this paragraph. I'm just going to say it out loud. Are you laughing at me?
Of course not.
I'm just going to be brutally honest. I hate this paragraph. Okay, so in the event that the total cost of fulfilling seller's obligations, including seller's costs in obtaining inspections, is more than this amount, they're not required. They have the option to not pay it. Does that make sense? So if you leave it blank, the amount is automatically $1,000. So a home inspection comes back, it needs some new roof work done.
This doesn't say, this is seller's obligation, so I'm gonna argue for a minute.
Mhm.
Seller's obligations to this is not to fix something that's found in the home inspection, because that is negotiable.
But that's what this is
But
saying.
it's
Which,
only, because for instance, in Lynchburg,
yeah,
this same paragraph is only applicable to the termite, well, and septic. Okay, because all inspections, home inspection thing, that's all negotiable, and that's not a seller's obligation. The seller is not obligated because it is still negotiated.
exactly. But this is why I hate this paragraph, because it doesn't matter if you have 10,000 in there, 5,000, it's still going to be negotiated out anyway. I'm sorry, if a seller needs to put a new roof on because the roof is bad and you have $1,000 written right here or zero, what buyer is going to be desperate enough to pay top dollar in this market for their property, for this house, or over asking, and then be willing to put a $20,000 new roof on it? Okay, so that's why I hate this paragraph, is because it's all negotiable anyway. It's all going to be negotiated out. Does that make sense? Some of y'all might disagree with my thinking there.
But I think that I think it's mostly meant to be for the termite, well, and septic, and that include the home inspection, because that is a separate addendum.
But I think most agents that I've ever worked with use it for the home inspection purposes.
I know, and I think it's wrong, but you know.
They should rewrite the paragraph. If anybody's listening, rewrite the paragraph. Okay. Okay, yeah, if the remediation limit is going to be just for well, septic, and termite, then it needs to say well, septic, and termite remediation limit. Okay, default. Number 18 goes over to page 5 and talks about if a party defaults, what's enforceable. Number 19 is the choice of settlement agent. The buyer has the right to use whoever they want for settlement. The seller can use the same person, or they can choose to use their own. You just do whatever there. And it outlines escrow, closing, and settlement service guidelines at the bottom of paragraph 19, the last paragraph under number 19. Title insurance on number 20. Title insurance disclosure. I don't know, is it mandatory right now? Is title insurance? I don't think it is.
No.
I always recommend to my client that they obtain title insurance. That is always my recommendation. But somebody recently told me they thought it was mandatory now.
No.
Okay. Just wondering if I missed something.
Should be.
Right. Settlement and possession. This is where you're going to write out where the buyer wants to have their closing, and then on or about what day. This again is where I would highly suggest you write out the full month, day, and year in case there's a typo of a number. Brokerage fee is 22. Assignability on number 23. The contract may or may not be assigned. Contracts, generally speaking, if your person is financing for then they're not going to be able to assign it. Most lenders want to make sure they're at least going to live in it, have their primary address there for at least a year. But if this is like an investment property and somebody is using cash or wholesaling a property, you can assign it. I bought a property wholesale that way. The contract was assigned to me. It was very simple. Okay. Property was horrible, but the contract was simple. Just saying. Faxes, attorney's fees, all of these things those are kind of like definitions or explanations. Home warranty program. This is where you are going to determine if the purchaser wants or declines a home warranty program and who is going to pay for it. Are they asking the seller to pay for it or provide it, or are they wanting to do it themselves? You can recommend all kinds of home insurance, home warranty programs and let them choose. Yeah, and make sure that they understand what they're buying. So get a pamphlet, have them call your representative who you use, or get a pamphlet and make sure that they really understand that this is not, ooh, I can get a whole new house in the first year if I play my cards right. Make sure they understand what's going down. Okay.
I have a question on 23.
Yes.
Do you generally leave that checked may or may not?
I usually do may not, because most of the people that I work with for some reason are financing. So
You know, just the other way around. Oh, wait a minute. 23.
23 assignability.
Oh, okay.
Now, if you're working with somebody who is doing an investment property and maybe they're doing a private money lender or cash, you can probably say may be assigned. All right, under additional terms, on the LAR, one of the terms I'm going to tell you what I put in here, just because it's what I'm used to. Under additional terms on the RVAR, I always specify that the purchaser's agent may or may not be present at inspections. Or I say the purchaser and the sellers and purchasers understand that the buyer's agents may not be present at all inspections. I do not personally go and sit for 4 hours for a home inspection. I do not. If there's something that I need to know, my inspector will call me and I can go over and take a look at it so that I can talk with my clients, but I do not go to all my inspections. That's my preference. I'm not a home inspector. I'm staying in my lane. I can't, disclosure, CYA if I don't know it, having known knowledge, I'm covering myself. I'm not a home inspector. And unless the home inspector tells me and I need to know it, I don't want to know it.
Interesting that you brought that up, but you must have a reason. I don't go either, but I don't ever put it in the contract.
I
Why
do.
do you add it to the contract?
Because lots of times I personally I don't use RVAR boxes. I use coded boxes. And so my contractors who are licensed, who I use, this is giving permission for me to be able to give them the code to let them in, and the other agent doesn't expect me to be there for the whole thing. So it's basically giving notice to everybody. So with the LAR, I put that on the, what's the form where it has the inspections? I put it at the bottom of the form that talks about inspection. What's it called? Is it the standard clauses addendum with the LAR? Anybody? They don't have an inspection addendum. Anyway, I write it in a different spot. I'm not going to take your time up while I figure it out. I write it in a different spot, but on the RVAR, because there's no spot on this inspection addendum for additional information, I write it on here, and I'm giving notice to the sellers, the buyers, the seller's agent, and me that I'm not going to be there.
You just say may not.
Right. If I have to go, then I have to go. Okay.
Did you put anything else in there?
If I have a home that's being sold as is and my buyer's buying it as is, I might include the statement that we understand it's being sold as is in that box.
Or seller's licensed agent.
Yes, if you have to make disclosure, remember, who do you have to tell that if you're party to the transaction, who do you have to tell? Everybody and their mothers. So make sure that you're disclosing it, outlining it right there under additional terms. The LAR, it's nice because it has an actual line on there that says, do you need to make any other disclosures as an agent? And if you're not party to the contract, you don't have to. We don't, with the RVAR, it's not on there. So you make sure you're disclosing it to everybody. So any other funky terms that are specified between the buyer and seller negotiations, you'd want to write them in there. Any other requests? All right. Page.
That put her stuff. I bet the bar will not make any repairs.
All right, page 6 and 7. This is from all of page 6 to the top of page 7 are terms and definitions and explanations for your client. So you can go through that with them to help them to understand what they're signing ahead of time. Sometimes I think Carol touched on this. I was going to say something and then Carol said it, but if you were on a part of the business meeting, lots of times right now we're all so hurried and rushed in the past year, or with COVID and things like that, lots of people didn't want to be face-to-face, so they did a lot of things electronically. Even if you're doing something electronically, like electronic signatures, you want to make sure, I always tell my clients, if they don't want to meet to do the contract, call me, pull it up on your computer and call me, and we will go through it line by line so I can answer your questions first. So I would, instead of just sending it over and saying, read it and be done and sign it and get it back to me, I would highly recommend that you at least go over it with them and answer their questions. And if you don't know an answer, because we don't know all the answers, say, I'll find out for you and get back to you. Then you can find out. Any questions on that?
I was gonna say, I really noticed that a lot lately. You're really right about that, because a lot of people just e-sign it and away they go and they don't even.
And they
read
have
it.
no idea. And then when the
Come up
inspections
on.
come up and there's things that need to be done, they're like, I didn't know
That
that.
wasn't in the contract.
Yeah, yes, it was. I had one time who, and luckily it was a good friend of mine, and it was in Roanoke. He was selling a house and buying a more expensive house, and he is he's bougie, I'm just going to say it. And his husband is not. So his husband is more conservative than he is, and the price was way above, it was $100,000 more than what they were selling. And so he was really talking him into this house. We had a conversation in the house about price. I gave him a suggestion about offering $5,000 less. This was last year though, before all, anyway, offering $5,000 less with A, B, and C done. They said, no, we want to offer the full price. So, okay. So I offered full price, sent him the contract. I said, call me when you get the contract. Let's talk about it. And he said, they have a recreational home off the lake. And they said, we're at the lake and we have spotty service. Just send it to me. We've talked about it and we'll sign it. And I said, well, call me and we can go up. No, that's okay. Signed it. Later on, he comes back after it's ratified and we are knee deep into it. And he said, I just realized that you offered full price what we talked. I said, that's because that's what we talked about. He said, no, we didn't. We agreed on the $5,000 less with A, B, and C. No, you didn't. We didn't have any text to prove it because we were in person when we talked about it. So I ate the $5,000 and gave it back to him. However, I got free hair. He owns a salon. I got free hair and color for 2 years. So we worked it out.
It works out.
But yeah, he's a friend of mine. So he paid for it. Well, no, well, yeah. So,
$100 on the other.
yeah. So the moral of the story is always go over it with them. That's not to say they're not going to come back later and go, no, we didn't. We didn't talk about that.
You got great hair. Your hair looks great.
Thanks. That's because I just had it done. I just tell you that story in all seriousness. I did eat that $5,000, you know.
You don't ever want to piss off a hairdresser.
You don't.
But ultimately, if they sign the contract, I mean, ultimately, if you sign the contract, you're beholden to what's in the contract.
Correct.
Indeed.
However,
Right, but how do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
and do you want to have your friends that have been lifelong friends, you know? And so, you know, it's the same thing with if you have buyer and a seller squabbling over a refrigerator or a washer and a dryer. Sometimes it's better just to say, welcome home. You know,
Gary Foster always
whatever.
told me, money fixes everything.
yeah,
Throw money. at it.
negotiate it out
Fixes
somehow.
everything.
That's right.
Gary Foster told me that. I need a pillow.
It also causes a lot of problems too.
It
It
does.
does cause problems,
True
but
that.
enough money will fix it.
Okay, last page.
Throw money at it.
The LAR contract is a lot different than the RVAR on the last page, because on the last page where the signatures are on the LAR, it's got Carol Massey's signature on there. You sign it. It's got your license number. It's got the office address. It's got your personal email. It's got the office email. It's got everything. This one, all it has is room for the seller and the seller's current address and the buyer and the buyer's current address.
Simple.
Simple. Keep it simple, sweetie, is the KISS method. So make sure you get it signed and get as much information as necessary. Really quickly, we talked about the inspection addendum. We talked about the residential property disclosures. This is a whole lot of information to shove into an hour to an hour and a half. So if you all have any questions, I'm not the end all be all. I just agreed to teach the class. But if I can't find the answer, I will find it for you. Did you notice what I did there? Same thing I say to my clients. There you go. Okay. The residential septic disclosure. If your person is on a septic system, it's the one pager. We don't have this with the LAR. Chances are, if you're selling in Botetourt County, you're probably, or by the lake, you're going to be on a septic system if you got land, you know, and you're in the middle of the country. So with the RVAR contract, you're going to need to complete the residential septic disclosure statement. And again, this is where the seller signs first.
I'm in one in Patrick County, and I've never worked with him before, and I called their guy yesterday, and I said, we need a septic disclosure. He said, we don't do that. And
They don't have to.
so I just do the template, and I put it in.
So what I would do in that case is on the purchase agreement in the extra column where I wrote that I'm not going to participate in inspections.
I'm not gonna change it right now.
So I would have done an addendum or something stating that your buyer wants at the seller's expense a septic inspection.
Well, I had an inspection addendum that he had to sign, and it says they have. to do
Okay,
septic.
good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't have to worry about. the
Right.
disclosure.
Yes.
Okay.
You're good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The standard clauses addendum is another one that you will likely have to fill out. This is probably in the packet. Well, no, it should have been, I don't know which one, but it's called standard clauses addendum. It's 3 pages. This is if you're doing a government loan, if it's subject to consummation, if you're putting a time is of the essence clause, whereas the LAR has things like time is of the essence in the contract. The LAR does not.
Wait a minute, nobody told me I had to consummate the contract. I'm gonna have to charge a lot more.
That's right.
It's a relationship, not transaction.
That's where the fees come in, right?
That's where the fees come in, yeah. Let me go back to that added fee.
They told you real estate was gonna change a lot.
So the standard clauses addendum is where you, if the property is subject to it closing based on the buyer's current property closing first, okay? So that's subject to consummation. You would fill it out on here. If you wanted to do a time is of the essence under acceptance, you can say, listen, our offer is only good till 5 p.m. today, and then it expires. You can put it right there under standard clauses addendum. If it's subject to a backup contract, or it is a backup contract, you can put it there. On page 2, there's a new construction clause, then qualification letter from the lender in the middle of the page. Generally speaking, if I have a pre-qualified buyer, then I already have a letter. So I would already give that to them and that wouldn't apply. But if you don't have a letter and it's on a weekend and you know they're going to pre-qualify because you've already talked to the lender, you just don't have the letter, you can use number 6 on page 2. and check that off that you will have the letter to them by Monday at 5. Seller financing, rezoning, you only click the ones that apply, and in the first line of the ones that don't, just write NA. Okay, don't leave them blank. And then, and this one is a pet peeve of mine, on page 3, leased equipment disclosure. If you know that your seller's propane tank is leased, please make that known in advance. If they have a security system and it's leased, please make that known in advance and who the company is. Yeah.
Hot water heaters could be leased.
Hot water heaters, water softening systems, all of that. If there's anything else that could be leased, please fill that out.
Modems.
Yeah, well, yeah. Direct TVs that are attached to those are owned generally by the property owner, but the service isn't. You have to hook it up, and then you have to sign it, the other agent has to sign it, and the clients have to sign it. So the standard clauses addendum is probably used almost with every contract that you do.
Question on number 9.
Yes.
Do you generally fill this out in advance and just check all the boxes just in case, or reach out to the listing agent and see what they have?
Sometimes the listing agent will be kind enough to put it in on the MLS form as to leased equipment. But if not, I would call them or text them and say, is there anything leased on the property? I'm writing an offer.
Good agents can do it.
Okay. Any questions on the standard addendum clause? If you're working with an FHA loan, a VA loan, a USDA, any kind of government loan, you are definitely going to use the standard clauses addendum. If your client wants a home inspection or any kind of inspection, you are going to use the inspection addendum. Everybody knows about lead-based paint, so I don't have to go over that, correct? Dual and designated agency, we already talked about. I told you I'm not skilled with lake addendums. With the lead-based paint disclosure, if the home is older than January 1978, this is another one of those forms that your seller should sign and initial, and you should upload it to the MLS along with the residential property disclosure. The seller should sign it first before a buyer, because the seller is the one disclosing that whether or not they have records of any lead-based paint on the property, or if they have no known knowledge of lead-based paint on the property. And then you simply advise your clients to not chew on the walls and they'll be fine. Chances are if it had lead-based paint, it was probably painted over 35 times.
Hard to get to it.
Well, yep. But you still want to make sure and there's the I think it's a 19-page brochure, the lead-based paint, protect your family. Make sure you're giving that to them. Send it to them through dot loop or whatever and let them read it at their leisure. I've had clients send me, or I've had other agents send me with their offer, the whole 19 pages where every page was initialed by their buyer. I'm like, really? So yeah, so this is one of those that you will have your seller do. The agent also has to sign this. You and the other agent have to sign. Okay. A few more minutes and then I'll have you out, I promise. Does everybody know what subject to sale is or kick-out clause? With the RVAR, if you have a buyer making an offer that is subject to the sale of their property and it has not yet gone under contract, this should be towards the bottom of your pile. This is called the subject to sale kick-out and subject to consummation clauses.
You don't see that in this market, but.
Correct. Most times it will be nipped in the bud in this market before you even write the offer, because you can say, hey, is your seller willing to accept a contingency at this point? And they'll say no. But
That'll change by next year.
I was going to say, in a normal market, you see this. So if your buyer has to sell a home before they can follow through with the purchase of the one they're making the offer on, then you will have to attach the kick-out clause. And basically this is stating that you, first of all, you fill out the top portion. You want this to become a part of the contract itself, the purchase agreement. So it's not listed here on the bottom of page 1 of your purchase agreement where it lists all the addendum that you want attached. The subject to sale is not already pre-printed, so you have to write it in. And you want it to be part of your contract. So make sure you write that in there if you're using one.
The buyer's market, this is what you're talking
Yes. So as representing the buyer, what you're doing here is giving notice to the seller that, listen, my buyer's property at 123 Main Street is going to be listed within 72 hours exclusively with me at Keller Williams. And we are asking that you give us 20 days to get it under contract, at which time we will remove the kickout clause and it will become subject to consummation. Does that make sense? Everybody done that before? So subject to consummation then continues to protect your buyer in the event that even when their home goes under contract, if something happens and the contract falls through, they're not stuck with 2 mortgages because it's subject to it closing. Subject to consummation means subject to closing, is the way I read it. Any questions? Okay. And then everybody has a copy of an addendum or amendment. The 2 things you can use either to amend or add an addendum to a contract if you are asked to make an addendum or if you have to amend something. Addendum this is how I know it, and you all might learn differently than me. To add an addendum is an addition to the contract. To add an amendment is to change the contract. So I've had people, and I don't know, maybe you have, where the seller's name, they decided after they got into the loan process that it would be better to add the wife's name to the contract. So then we had to amend the purchase agreement to include the wife's name. That's pertinent information. So that's when it becomes an amendment. That's the difference in addendum and amendment. But this form for RVAR says addendum/amendment. So you're going to use the same form regardless. I think it's that way for LAR too, but just so you know the difference. Okay. Removal of contingency is another 1-pager. Once your home, this really doesn't make any sense, but you can, if you have a home inspection and everything's agreed to and the repairs are done, you can do a removal of contingency for the home inspection or a radon inspection if it's done and everything's good. But I think the contract states that if you don't respond within so many days, it expires anyway. Some people still use it, some people don't. They just let it expire off. But there's a removal of contingency. And then finally, the termination of contract and the release of contract. If you have a client, I'm just going to say it this way, get them both signed.
Absolutely.
That's it. They're not the same thing, and you want to cover your client.
A release, a termination will terminate the contract, but not necessarily get your EMV back.
Correct. Termination makes the contract go bye-bye, but it doesn't release your client or their monies until the release is signed.
I don't have a release.
You can have mine. So the easiest way to not catch yourself, or keep your client caught up, is to get them both signed. And a lot of brokers in the area require it anyway. They won't sign to release the earnest money deposit until the release and termination are both done. Any questions on those?
I'm not sure I have a termination.
Here,
Let's see.
I need
Yeah,
this
I
one.
don't even.
Oh,
Either this one.
well, I just messed up all y'all, didn't I? Fire me. Are you sure?
I've had mine perfect.
I can't. Well, I don't know. I
No,
haven't checked all 100 pages.
I might have one or something.
It's in dot loop.
It's in dot loop. Yeah, they're in dot loop.
Take it back. I stand corrected.
They're in dot loop. And again, if you go to the RVAR site and you look at the right side, midway down, it'll say RVAR forms and you can get the current forms. If you have not done a transaction in the RVAR and you need help with the first one, second one, fifth one, I'm happy, like I said, I'm not a guru by any means. It's just been my primary since 2005, when I originally started real estate. So I can give you my number, and I'm happy, you can call me or text me, and I'm happy to help you. It's 540-588-0243.
I could not find the lead paint and your family don't eat paint chips in Dartmouth last time I looked. What is that name? So I can look better.
Oh gosh, I love it. It is lead-based paint disclosure, and
You can't find it in RVAR and put LAR.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's the same one. It's the same document.
I tried searching for lead and based and paint and lead based.
And got nothing.
Yeah. and-
Try LBP.
LB.
It might
oh,
be
yeah.
abbreviated.
Okay.
And again, remember what documents you should upload with your sellers to the MLS is the residential property disclosure, the lead-based paint disclosure. Remember, there's a third one. Residential. For me, I always upload either the summary of rights or the RPD 2 that we use now for Keller Williams, initialed by my clients. I always upload it as well. You don't have to. That's my choice. I want everybody to initial. I haven't had anybody tell me no at this point. Nobody's actually questioned me on it either. So, the lead-based paint disclosure. Oh, the septic disclosure. If it's in Roanoke or one of the areas that does on the RVAR, the septic disclosure, lead-based paint disclosure, residential property disclosure. And if you have the summary of rights or the RPD 2, if you want to include those, you can as well. Any questions? Does anybody want another blank pack because they wrote on one and no?
Sure.
I got extras and I don't want to take them home. That's gonna go in the trash. All right. I know sometimes you write notes on one and then you want to have a clean one just to. Thank y'all for coming. If you have questions, you're welcome anytime.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You want one?